Welcome back to another episode of the Open Therapy Podcast. This is a podcast where we talk about culture through the lens of psychoanalysis and psychotherapy. I'm here with Andrew Hartz and Rob Henderson. I am Megan Dom, your lady in the middle. I think I'm going to start saying Dom now. I think I'm going to go back to the original mispronunciation of my name. So,
Dom.
Just putting you guys on notice. I think that Dom is kind of hard to say. Anyway, it's good to see you. What have you guys been thinking about and reading this week?
Well, I sent over the first introduction to a book by George Bataille called Erotism.
Erotism?
Erotism.
Is that how you say that?
I think it's not eroticism, it's
okay.
Erotism.
Mm-hmm.
And it was he's a postmodern French thinker. His wife divorced him and married Lacan.
Oh, I hate when that happens.
And Lacan is probably the most influential French psychoanalyst. So his words are kind of pseudo-analytic or partly psychoanalytic. And they have some really interesting ideas in them, but they have all the problems that come with French postmodernism and some of the kind of transgressive thought. So I just thought it was like a thought-provoking reading that I used to teach in my class, and my students all thought it was sexist, and that was about all they had to say about it.
Oh, they did? Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I thought it could provoke interesting conversations, but I think grad students these days just don't have a lot of modes other than calling things sexist or racist. So there wasn't a very interesting conversation, unfortunately, that came out of it, but I thought it's a really thought-provoking essay, and it's like one of these, it's like poetry. It's not like philosophy. He just kind of makes lots of assertions and lots of claims that are kind of thrown out sloppily, and doesn't really back them up or feel the need to argue.
You do amazing on Substack.
Yeah.
Probably would, yeah. Except it's like what you're describing, Andrew. I think that's such a like stupid, like just really lazy way to read something is just to find something you're offended by or something you disagree with, and then just focus on that. Like I think like half of what he said, probably more, like made no sense, or like some of it I couldn't follow, but I did my best to salvage what I thought was interesting or thought-provoking or worth discussing, and then just kind of discarding or overlooking some of the crazy stuff. I mean, we could talk about some of the stuff he said that seemed a little off, but it's just such a lazy way of reading it. It's a real shame. I'm not that far out of grad school, and I remember those conversations about cryptic homophobia and so on, and it's just obnoxious. But I liked the opening, though. I've been reading a lot of Dostoevsky recently, and Bataille opens with a quote from the brothers Karamazov, and I liked this. It's kind of a long quote, but what I got from it: "Beauty is a terrible and awful thing. It is terrible because it has not been fathomed. I cannot bear the thought that a man of noble heart and lofty mind sets out with the ideal of the Madonna and ends with the ideal of Saddam." And then he later, in this quote, says, "The man with the ideal of Saddam in his soul does not renounce Madonna," and goes on, "his longing for the beautiful ideal, just as in the days of his youthful innocence." And so this is like the Madonna whore complex, a man who likes the sort of the depraved and the debased, but also this innocent, noble ideal. I thought it was fascinating, and I guess that's kind of like the point of this essay is like that these two sort of polar opposites are somehow united.
Totally. And I think it is beautiful. I also think it works as a clinical theory for therapy and like a explaining. And what I think is so great about it is that it actually it's why do we feel the way we feel about erotic stimuli? The thing that I love about Bataille is that he's trying to talk about what does sex and eroticism mean to us? What do we feel about it and why? And as opposed to a lot of the ways that I think people think about it, it's biological. It's like a biological thing. It's just biological. But that doesn't explain why we feel the way we do about it. And I think he's like, even if he's not right, and I don't think he's entirely right, by any means, but it's like a really interesting starting point of like, what do we emotionally get out of it? How do we relate to it? And he does highlight three elements that I think are really interesting, like sacredness, like a sacred profane dynamic, and violence. And so there's kind of like sexual desire and like sacredness and violence that are all kind of marbled together. And he has this really, I think, eloquent way of explaining why, how those meanings come together. So like, I think like his central image of like what sex means to people is of like ritual sacrifice, like human or animal sacrifice. So like we're limited. So we're bounded in time between our birth and death, and we're bounded in space by our skin. And that there's a distress, there's like a unpleasantness, a suffering, a pain that comes from being limited. And there's this desire to break through that barrier into the continuous, to that release of not being discontinuous is the erotic desire. And there's basically three ways that you can break through that barrier. And one of them is spirituality, one of them is sex, and the third is violence. And they're all ways of releasing. And so those meanings kind of get folded into each other. So religion has a lot of violent imagery. Think about like a bloody crucifix, ritual sacrifice. It's really across religions. There's a lot of violent imagery in religion. And then there's also a lot of like erotic themes in a lot of religion too. And then violence sometimes has spiritual connotations, and it sometimes has erotic connotations, and eroticism has sometimes violent connotations and spiritual connotations, and they're all related. And part of the reason why I think Bataille would say there is this violent element that's embedded in sexuality is that you need to break through the barrier in order to get release. So there has to be a force that breaks through the self in order to get gratification. But that can be a very disturbing and painful thing if it's not contained in some level by sacredness. And so if you think about the way people have sex, there's ritual around it, there's privacy, there's containment, there's limits, and then there's also a need to have this violent element of breaking through the self so that you can actually have that experience, that release. And so I think it just hits a lot about what's violent about sexuality and what's disturbing about it when it's in the wrong place, and what's also like transcendent about it, and how I think people struggle sometimes with those existing at the same time, that it could be this kind of sacred, spiritual, transcendent, loving thing, but also this kind of violent, disturbing thing at the same time. And when you think about therapy, where people come in with relationship problems about sex or clinical problems that have these sexual dimensions, this is often there. Like that there's like conflicts around aggression. Maybe they're too aggressive. Maybe they can't be aggressive. Conflicts around sacredness. Maybe they're overly sacred and overly guarded with it, or underly guarded and it's disturbed. There's all these different ways, like why, like when an affair happens, there's kind of this breaking of the sacredness that it can't contain the violence. Sometimes couples stop having sex and they just fight. But the fights serve an erotic function of they get this release through it, and sometimes they're okay with it, weirdly, because they get maybe more of a release. So there's all these elements of whether it doesn't have to be BDSM. It could be plain vanilla sex, but even like, why would people be attracted to BDSM? And it's often because they feel like there's a breakthrough with it and a release that they wouldn't get with something that's more tame. And so there's all these different thoughts and feelings and associations related to the erotic that I think Bataille hits on that are accurate. And really, but he also does something like he's using the word violence in the French postmodern way that we've all learned to hate, of, he's not necessarily meaning literal violence, but he's kind of conflating both literal violence and maybe like an emotional breakthrough of the self as like being the same. And so anyway, there's just a lot here. And you think about religions where there's celibacy and rules around sex, but then there's erotic metaphors in terms of spirituality. There's all this stuff is just kind of like floating around in the Bataille work that in a really thought-provoking way.
That's a very good breakdown. What kind of thinkers or types are drawn to Bataille's work?
So, sorry for crunching ice. I think he really influenced Lacan. So the whole French psychoanalytic school is influenced by this stuff a lot. I think it's like in current society, it's like French postmodern academics who like to just riff about things and are kind of incoherent. I don't see it having a big role among therapists generally. I don't think they're really reading it a lot. And I think he's kind of forgotten. Maybe, I mean, he was trendy not that long ago, but I think he's kind of like maybe unacceptable to the left because there's these sexist themes in it, potential misogynistic themes in it, potentially, but that are maybe the left is uncomfortable with elements that they would read as misogynistic, whereas the right maybe doesn't like the transgressive French postmodernist elements. So kind of, he's the type of person that everybody would probably hate and nobody would like. And so I don't know that he has a intellectual future, to be honest. I think I don't know how he would come back and be influential, but it's still a thought-provoking model to me.
And the name of this text is, I'm looking it up now. What is this called? The name, erotism.
Erotism.
Okay, erotism. Why did he call it erotism and not eroticism?
I don't know for certain, but I think
Okay.
he's kind of like trying to give it a, it's not just about, it's not a precise definition of what is eroticism, but he's actually
Okay.
talking about something that has maybe erotic and non-erotic elements in it. That's kind of like about the breakthrough of the self, and it has these spiritual and existential overtones that aren't just limited to sex. But that's my guess. I don't know if he spells out in the text exactly why he does that.
Yeah. So this idea of like, so we're discontinuous, and then
did
through
Rob freeze?
sex we become continuous through sort of this unification. Is that part of the idea here? Is sort of you lose yourself in this other person, but it's this kind of violent, disruptive, terrifying act.
Yeah, and it would probably be different for the typical male experience and the typical female experience, because the female experience tends to be one of like surrender, and so the male is like the
Pursuer,
the more
yeah.
aggressive,
the sacrificer. He
the
calls the male.
sacrificer.
Yeah.
So the woman
Meaning
is
he is the one who is kind of sacrificing himself, or the woman?
Yeah, I don't get
woman.
it. How is he the sacrificer?
Yeah, the woman. Okay, that's what I figured.
the woman is being sacrificed. She's the one who's dying, and her ego is kind of surrendering, which is why partly you could say like why female orgasms seem so much better than male orgasms.
Wait, where do you get that?
Yeah, I think female orgasms seem like amazingly
Because
much better.
because Meg Ryan can fake one while eating a sandwich and
yeah.
Oh, okay.
But there's
Wow,
this
this is a topic for a
infinity-
whole other time, because I think that because the dramatic, female orgasms are very, very often, not often, but they have been known to be faked. There's
Yeah,
a performative
yeah,
aspect to
yeah.
them. You can get away with faking them. There's no proof.
So this observation about like male versus female orgasms. So first, there have been a couple of interesting studies on this about the female orgasm, where they're much more likely to have one in a committed relationship. It's something like 70% of the time in a committed relationship during sex they have one, and then like it drops dramatically depending on how familiar they are with their partner. So if they've only had like 3 hookups with this person, the likelihood of having an orgasm drops to something like 40%. And then if it's like a one-night stand, it's like in the single digits, the likelihood of orgasm. And so that's sort of, this is like empirically validated studies. But then on a more sort of, anecdotal level, having conversations with friends about sex and the experience here, it does seem like women lose themselves more when they're having sort of a pleasurable sexual interaction. And one way, sort of observable, is that with men during sex, like men will like kind of look at their partner, and that's like part of the, I guess, excitement and the experience of it is sort of like the gazing at the woman before you. And obviously we're talking sort of heterosexual relationships. But for women, especially when they are experiencing intense pleasure, they kind of don't look at the man. They're kind of just looking around, or their eyes are closed, or they're just
during
kind of
the
like,
orgasm itself.
Yes, or even
The
during
whole
sex,
time.
where they're just kind of like not, they don't seem like fully, I guess, present. Like the man is like, wow, I have this like hot naked woman in front of me. This is amazing. And for women, it's like something else is going on where they're just like thinking, and something's happening in their minds that removes them from the moment, but like they are still in it. And does this make sense?
Yeah. I mean, not to
Megan, you can tell me if I'm way off
going,
base
guys.
here.
Keep
We
going.
don't
It's
need to-
okay.
Rob, you and I can have this conversation. Megan doesn't need to.
No, this is
We'll just-
fascinating because I don't. I mean, but often, like, I mean, I never heard of this as being particularly gendered. Like the idea that somebody was kind of checked out or thinking about something else. I mean, and there's
No.
also all those tropes like men trying to keep themselves from coming too soon, so they're like reciting baseball statistics in their head, or something like that.
It's like teenage boy stuff,
Yeah, well, I that might go on past my level. I don't know, but this
Okay.
is I'll have to think about this.
I would say, well, this is, I guess, might be totally wrong. My sense is that it's like, and I think what Bataille is saying, it's what he's claiming, which might be wrong too, is it's kind of like an egoless thing. It tends to be nonverbal. It's about you're being sacrificed, so you're kind of like your ego is dissolving. You get this immense release, but it's nonverbal and it's maybe non-specific. Whereas the male gratification is more about consuming the female, and it tends to be more possessive and narcissistic. And so it's about consuming, and it's this possessive narcissistic gratification where you're like obtaining one other person, as opposed to woman's, which is like nonverbal and infinite release. And that's how he would frame it, but maybe that's a myth.
I mean, I was noticing something about your construction a minute or so ago, Rob. So you're talking about how women are more likely to have an orgasm when they know their partner, or when they're familiar with their partner. But I would say it's the other. I mean, it's because it's when their partner knows them. When their partner is familiar with them, they are going to have an orgasm because the partner knows what they like. So
Women's
I
body.
mean, I know it's sort of 6 of one, half dozen of the other, but I think that the way that was constructed, sort of the logic.
Yeah,
of that is
that's interesting, because
Yeah.
women's bodies are very
that's
different,
interesting,
and they respond to different types of touch and
Yeah,
stimulation.
you have to know. I mean, it's first time, worst time is not for nothing.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, so I don't know the answer to this question, but you can imagine a woman who knows a guy for one day and she finds him attractive, and then they sleep together that day, versus a man or a woman who knows a man for a year and finds him attractive, and then they sleep together for the first time. I imagine that second case, the woman would still find that sleeping together more pleasurable than in the first case, even though it's the first time having sex in both cases. But in the second case, she's known him for a year versus only a day. Does that make sense?
Maybe. I mean, I think we're kind of
Okay.
talking about a whole bunch of different things. If you're talking about
Yeah.
actually, knowing what is going to stimulate somebody, you cannot
Yeah.
know that unless you're actually
Okay.
having a quote unquote hands-on experience.
But what I'm hearing you getting at, Rob, which I think is true, is that there's this balance between the sacredness maybe and the violence, and there needs to be, I think, people are different about this, but like some type of relationship and connection and attachment does provide a container that can make it more gratifying, that can make sex more gratifying, that you're more trusting, you're more uninhibited, you know each other, and that is an element that's often important. But then there is another side where I think long term, like, obviously 5, 10, 20 years, there's almost like an over familiarity that can also stifle things. And they often sometimes need to, they're like too merged together. So there's no breakthrough. There's
Right.
no like, so you kind of have to be, what's gratifying is there's separate people, enough of a container, and then a breakthrough to get the release. There's this whole kind of, it's almost like a sexual theory. And I'm not committed to, like, by any means to baptize theory, but I wish we had more theories about this type of thing, even just for therapists thinking about what's happening with this couple's sex life, what's happening with this person's sex life, why do they feel about it the way they do. And this is one of the only conceptual models I have to think about. Is there too much sacredness? Is there not enough sacredness? Is there not enough violence? Is there too much violence? What is the issue here? There's at least something for me to think about what could be going wrong or right in the interaction. And there's not a lot of other theories out there that I know of.
I liked this quote from Bataille. He said, so sort of on this point of the like uniting the sacred and this depraved aspect of sex, it says, "Let me stress that in this work, flights of Christian religious experience and bursts of erotic impulses are to be seen as part and parcel of the same movement." So there's this sort of the Christian aspect and then the erotic impulse. But I read this and then I think about like, we talked about a little bit about the manosphere and the red pill guys in the past, and I think there's often this weird sort of evolution with those guys where when they're in their like manosphere red pill phase or whatever, they're super into sex and women and being just very ostentatiously sexual or obsessed with sex and controlling women and being domineering. But a lot of these guys also seem to like renounce that and then become, these like, I mean, I think a lot of it is fake, but like sort of Christian influencers, or they like start talking about being religious, or they move into, just a more sort of quasi-spiritual mode. I think part of it is like, the red pill grift is over and now I need to do something else. Or they get married and like you can't be like a red pill bro if you're like in a committed relationship, so now you got to do something else. But I think there is still like this element of, okay, I lived this depraved life and now I need to counterbalance it with something more sacred, more religious, more pure. And then I see something similar with like the tech bro materialists, where they're like obsessed with making money and attaining worldly success. And then once they acquire it, then they start to become like weirdly interested in psychedelics and transcendence and enlightenment. And they're trying to like achieve something higher than the material realm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And there is this need to kind of, I think the metaphor of like the skin barrier and the agony of being discontinuous and this desire to break through it, I think that's a beautiful image for anything, like for eroticism, sure, but also just for meaning and spirituality and what it is that's distressing about being limited, and the desire to kind of break through that, and the different things people are grabbing on to get to that. And it might actually not be, it might be the same desire that makes you want to be an alpha and a Christian influencer and use psychedelics or like other things like transhumanism, cyborg stuff, or whatever it is. There's this kind of like we want to break through.
You're seeking, right?
Yeah, and this frames the problem as like is it about meaning, or is it about, it might not even really be about meaning. It's about breaking through our discontinuity. That is like, there's not a meaning per se, but there's a release or something.
So you mentioned, so it's like these three modes of escaping discontinuity into continuity: violence, sex, and religion. But I think, with the tech bro materialists, they use drugs, right? Like, would Bataille categorize drugs into maybe like quasi-religious experience with psychedelics and ayahuasca, psilocybin, like?
I don't. The dominant psychoanalytic theory, this isn't Bataille, but the dominant psychoanalytic theory for a long time, I think still, about what psychedelics do is they dissolve the ego, the Freudian ego. So the things that the ego does is about defense mechanisms, emotion regulation, identity, reality testing, And some people have very rigid egos, and some people have very porous or weak egos. And there is this idea of ego strength. How
Mm-hmm.
and people with really rigid egos, they have a lot of defensives, a lot of regulations, and a lot of emotion regulation, and they're often not connected to emotions. They maybe have very narrow worldviews. And what happens with the psychedelic as a treatment is supposedly that it weakens the ego and it allows it to be reshaped and opened up, which is similar to what Bataille is talking about. But for me, I'll just say my biggest concern about psychedelics is that people are maybe really majorly reshaping their egos or impacting their personality structure in big ways and not appreciating what they're doing. And it could be gratifying for them, maybe in the short or long term, but they might actually be messing with bigger things than they realize. And their ego's changing. Like Charles Manson supposedly used psychedelics because you could weaken the ego and remold it, and that's how he controlled his followers and got them to kill people. So if it's like, if that's something that psychedelics can do, is like radical personality changes, these are something that people I think should be more cautious about.
So if you're kind of like this hyper conscientious, very high impulse control freak, then maybe there's some benefit to taking these drugs. But if you have weak ego strength and you take these drugs, then you can become more susceptible to manipulation and influence.
That would seem to be what the theory would imply. And like the tech guys who tend to be obsessive, less emotional, more rigid, I could see it being like they're finally less rigid and finally emotional, or finally, not as defended against things. But you could think, if you're defending against severe trauma or real emotions that you can't handle, that could be really traumatic, or your ego could get reshaped in ways that don't feel good. I just read another, speaking of, we talked about this last time, but I just read another R. Crumb. He had a new book, and it was about this bad trip he took where this person gave him acid and really seemed to mess with him. So there's all this, I think there's just a lot of stuff that can happen that people don't think about when they think about psychedelics. They think about them almost magically, as like it just fixes everything or something. You know what
I don't know.
Really,
I mean, it fixes it, or it completely, does irreversible damage. I mean, I'm interested, Rob. I want to hear what you have to say. Before I forget, like, if you have a sort of psychological profile where somebody is very rigid, almost autism spectrum, which a lot of these tech guys are, it seems possible that these drugs might kind of release some of that spectrumy stuff in a way that was useful. I mean, I don't know how much research has been done on this type of personality doing these drugs. I mean, I don't know, like these guys, like in the Timothy Leary days, I don't know what these guys were really like, but there was kind of like a hippie artist, bohemian personality profile that was associated with these drugs, and now we have a very different cognitive profile. So I don't know.
The stereotype of somebody who's tripped too much is somebody with a really weak, porous ego.
Yeah, right.
Poor judgment, no motivation, poor reality testing, poor identity, weird interpersonal boundaries, emotion dysregulation sometimes, or no clear defense mechanisms. It's like it can be gratifying to kind of have this because they feel good, but they're kind of like less driven, less organized, less motivated.
Yeah, well, right.
My impression is, I mean, based on what Andrew is saying here, and this is, just an impression, is that if you are the kind of artistic bohemian type, you probably already do have more of a porous ego. You're more open-minded, interested in ideas, maybe more empathic in a lot of ways, and more attuned with your emotions. Then maybe taking these drugs could be risky, versus if you're the kind of conventional sort of tech entrepreneur, tech guy who's very rigid, disconnected from your emotions, see the world in a specific way and find it difficult to connect with the people around you, then maybe sort of opening your ego and becoming sort of more open and escaping your own mind could be beneficial. I'm thinking about there's this evolutionary biologist, Robert Trivers, recently passed away, and he was this sort of iconic figure in the field of evolutionary science, evolutionary biology, evolutionary psychology. And Steven Pinker wrote a nice kind of obituary for him in Quillette. And Pinker pointed out that Trivers kind of was a hippie in the 70s. He was a white guy, but he was a member of the Black Panthers. He got arrested a bunch of times, just had this crazy life story. But he was also a professor at Harvard and just one of these guys, right? And so, but there was this 5-year period in the 70s, I think it was about 5 years, where he essentially like changed the entire field, came up with all of these fascinating new theories that are widely accepted today and still studied. So it was this incredible burst of activity. And then Pinker asks in this Quillette piece, like, why did he have this like miracle 5 years and then his career kind of stalled and he never did anything nearly as impressive since? And Pinker suggests, this guy, if you knew him, and Pinker did know him, he always reeked of marijuana. Like, this guy was just never not stoned. Like, some of it was sort of self-medicating because he had sort of hypomania and all these other issues. But, for him, the marijuana may have been sort of beneficial on a personal level, although there's a question about that. But then in terms of his sort of career, like, maybe you need that kind of hyper-focused rigidity, that hypomanic, high energy, like, I'm obsessed with this idea. And then once drugs start to get involved, you lose motivation, your mind starts to fragment, and it's hard to focus for long periods of time.
Wasn't he living on like Jamaica, and he had this kind of like in his Trivers in his later years, he was sort of like on this island with these kind of having this exotic kind of. I don't know what it's like. There are a lot of women around, or he had some kind of exotic girlfriend. I don't.
One of his graduate students wrote a Substack piece. One of his former graduate students, and he said that like Trivers would visit. I think he was at Rutgers at this time, and he would talk to Trivers about I just got back from Jamaica, and he would say, what was going on in Jamaica? Trivers would say like, like 2 guys broke into my house, and so I jumped out of the second story, and then these guys like chased me, and I stabbed them with my knife. And he was 67 years old at this time. Obviously, like, there's no one could confirm or deny whether this actually happened.
No drug,
this
no
guy was just a
psychedelic,
wild
no
man.
drug connection. Definitely.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Huh.
anyway,
But
yeah,
cannabis is like interesting too, where I think I don't think it functions the same way as the psychedelics, or it's theorized to, but we also don't have great theories about how this stuff affects people's personalities. And on an individual base, like, we can look at like average outcomes on different measures and stuff like that of chronic users or something, but like what it's really doing for people, I feel like there's not as great of theories about why people are attracted to it and what they get out of it. And a lot of the theory about like why do people use particular drugs, I think the most dominant theory is it's just what's around. People just do. There's no reason why they're drawn to anything. It's like people who want to use drugs will use what's around, and if that's cocaine, they'll do that, and if it's cannabis, they'll do that, and if it's heroin, they'll do, like, it's like there's not really a lot beyond that.
And the drugs change. I mean, cannabis of today is so much different than
Right.
30 years ago. I mean, even like, I've been doing podcasts about this, like methamphetamine, and is profoundly different now than it was even 5 years ago. Basically, induces immediate psychosis. I mean, the people that you see stumbling around, street homeless population, they're not schizophrenic. Most of them, they are using this particular kind of methamphetamine. Anyway, that's a whole different topic. I mean, getting back to Bataille for a minute, I was telling you, Andrew, when I was in college, when I was an undergraduate, it was very fashionable to read Bataille and Marquis de Sade and these kind of extremely transgressive, French theorists, and be very interested in their work aesthetically, but not see them as like models or anything. I mean, and I was thinking about you, Rob, like this is very much a luxury beliefs example. So like, in my cohort, we would be very interested in these ideas as concepts to discuss, but we were pretty normie. Like, we did not have people in threesomes, or nobody was engaged in actual BDSM. I mean, maybe they were, but it was certainly not like it was not an affinity group. We were normies in our actual lives, but in terms of what we were like going to discuss intellectually, we were very open to things. But there's a paradox there, because we were pretty conservative in how we were actually behaving.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, that's that's the classic sort of
right.
Walk the 50s, talk the 60s.
Yeah, and this whole I mean, I don't know. We're recording this on March 30th, and Lindy West discourse has been very much in the air. So this is a memoirist that. She was a very, very big feminist blogosphere presence, and has a new memoir about how she was in a marriage, and then her husband announces that he's polyamorous. We won't go into all the details, but effectively she's in a throuple. She talks about how she's in a throuple, and this is working great, and most people don't believe her. And this just seems to be a sort of example of people kind of performatively acting out transgression, and that seems to me a little bit in keeping with the tie.
Do you think, Megan, that there's, because I don't know, I feel like in the patient population that I've seen in New York, there's lots of transgressive stuff that people seem to be into. I don't know how much of it is, it's just performative, or I don't know.
You mean sexually? What do you mean? Like people coming for therapy?
Yeah. That there's a lot of, there's just like a really, really wide range of sexual practices that seem to be like ever proliferating, and fetishes and different types of behavior. I do get the sense that people are chasing something, but maybe it's, I don't know, maybe it's more fake than people think.
Is it men mostly, or men and women?
Well, there was a while ago. I mean, I don't see so many patients anymore, but there were a lot. I had a string of patients who were into sex clubs and like group sex. They tended to always be people who had an addiction history, and sometimes they would be really candid about like, oh, I used to do drugs and now I do this.
Now I do sex. Yeah.
It was like, but it was kind of like, this is my, this is my new thing. And it was like an attempt. I don't know how much of it was trauma focused, or how much of it was like they need something that's stimulating to keep. I didn't understand what was driving them. I assumed that. Yeah, but there are. I think that's people do that.
I mean, there are these clubs. I mean, I keep hearing about these like sex parties and stuff in Brooklyn, and.
Yeah.
This is a kind of a millennial thing, but I feel like this is a kind of like millennial people are married now, they're parents, they're kind of like having these normie lives, and so this is the kind of millennial version of the key party, right? Like during the Cheever, the kind of 50s swingers kind of culture. It's funny because, again, not to make this all about generational differences, but as a Gen Xer, the AIDS crisis was going on when we were kind of coming of age in our 20s. And I think that had a real impact on, especially among heterosexuals. I don't think that there was a huge interest in super transgressive sex. I mean, that's a big generalization. Obviously, it was there, but it didn't feel like something that you were going to absorb into some kind of lifestyle expression. Like, it didn't feel like a vehicle of style necessarily.
The Bataille explanation for this, I think, would be that as people are having more and more partners and more sex, there's a need for more violence in it to get that sense of breakthrough. Like, if you're in a very repressive society where women are very covered up and everything, and then it's just being naked has that violent force because it's so rare and special or whatever, and so just being naked together gives you that force. When that's not there, when you've had tons of partners, you need more to get a sense of so it kind of has to keep upping in terms of the
Yes.
intensity of it to get a release.
Yeah, you build up a tolerance, so you have to
You have
increase
to do,
the
and
dose.
so, and it could
Yes.
get, and I think there's a prediction, which is if that's true, especially with internet pornography and different attitudes towards sex, that violence would be expected to just keep upping the transgression, keep upping. I mean, and it's like some of the most popular like porn categories are like incest, group sex, whatever it is. It's the stuff that people need to like, the bigger age differences and bigger
Right.
this and that, and it has to be because to get, but it's just a treadmill. Like it's just going to keep upping and upping and upping.
Yeah. That's why people in religious communities probably have really hot sex, because
Right.
the bar is lower. I mean, even just, you talk to people who are in like Orthodox Jewish communities, and like the women would never even shake the hand of a man you're not related to, and they're just there's a lot of boundaries around sex, when you're gonna do it, when you're not gonna do it, like what how much skin you're gonna show in the world.
And there was a great article about Victorian fashion in Vienna during Freud's time, because it's really kind of the most hypersexual clothing humans may have ever created, where every inch of the woman's body is covered, like for the gloves and the corsets and the laces and fastens and buckles and everything, yet all in a way that like really heightens the female form,
Right,
but it totally covers every inch. And there's this kind of like, that's exactly kind of what I think Bataille is getting at in terms of like that.
The yoga pants of that era.
The Lululemon of its time. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I wonder if there's an analogy, like, because we're talking about sort of sex and having to sort of chase ever higher, it was like novelty cycles or something more stimulating with drugs, right? Like if you don't do drugs, when once in a while you smoke marijuana, then it's going to hit you and it's going to be extremely pleasurable and unique sensation. But if you smoke every day, then eventually you're going to need the next hit, the next hardest dose, the next kind of drug, something more novel, something more potent, more stimulating. So there's a way to, I guess, achieve that same level of pleasure or satisfaction. But I want to ask a question about this Bataille reading, where he talks about, he seems to suggest that desire in itself is kind of inherently violent or precipitates violence. Is that right?
Well, I think the desire to break through your discontinuity has because
Okay.
you are breaking through this barrier, and there is a force that's needed to get there. Yeah.
Yeah, so I'm wondering, like, if it's the case that desire is somehow intertwined with violence or is inherently transgressive in some way, like what if we could connect that to what we're seeing now, where desire seems to be so heavily policed of who's allowed to be attracted to who. I'm thinking about, like, for example, on like the age gap discourse online of if you're too old, then that's like grooming, or if you're too young, there's a power imbalance, you can't possibly really be attracted to this person, or even relationship advice that you often see. It's about sort of promoting separation or leaving someone, or saying that you're being or things are red flags, or you're being psyoped, or you're being gaslit. Of like, people seem to have this like sort of very strong feelings about what you're allowed to desire now.
Yeah, it's a weird form of puritanicalism, right? It's almost like they're grasping. They want to go back to some kind of purity policing, but it's coming out in these weird ways.
Yeah, there could be like a lot of different psychoanalytic interpretations of this, but like part of it is like if you don't have any limits on the desire, you kind of like you fragment. And it's like this kind of like you have so much desire, it's like you kind of lose yourself. It's almost can get psychotic, and you're just kind of like everything's gratifying. And so you need to be contained. And so as we kind of like lose this moral function of like historical morality that kind of contained us, people are like grasping for these new forms of morality to like limit our pleasure because it's like too much gratification is threatening. And it's like we have this, in some ways we have a society that's all about pleasure, and people are kind of like fighting back against that and trying to use shame and limits and things to kind of like hold us in, because that's terrifying.
The boundaries.
You need to have some type of moral containment, but since we don't have the historical moral boundaries, we have to create these new ones that are
He talks about Bataille, physical eroticism. He says that it has a heavy, sinister quality. It holds on to the separateness of the individual in a rather selfish and cynical fashion. So I guess he's saying that, if you're with someone intimately, but it's all about just the physical pleasure and sensation, you're not actually becoming continuous with this person. You're still, because you're viewing them just as a source of pleasure and not as someone I guess you're supposed to unite together with. And I think that's why he calls it sinister. But then, like, we do see, like, that is often what happens now in sexual relations with men and women, with hookup culture, with casual sex, with just these sort of fleeting encounters, situationships where you're not supposed to catch feelings, and it's all about just sort of using this other person as a source of sexual pleasure. But also in this sort of quasi-romantic sense of, maybe you kind of hang out and pretend to be in a relationship, but it's really just about sex. And, maybe some of the dissatisfaction we're seeing, it's this result of attempting to escape discontinuity, but still remaining in it because you're only chasing physical eroticism.
Yeah, it can't be. It can't be as gratifying as like something that's deeper, a deeper sense of a breakthrough. Like, I think just like a physical, if it doesn't have that meaning, that's the main driver of the pleasure and the release, is that deeper sense of a breakthrough. And if it's just a physical, you just are using each other and there's no depth to it, I don't know. Maybe I'm unusual. That doesn't seem to me like it could be that gratifying.
I don't think you're that unusual.
Okay.
But we talk so much about the disembodied nature of our lives now. And people are just living online, obviously, and having these relationships where they don't even meet the person in real life ever, or having what they will describe as a sexual relationship that is taking place entirely over screens and this kind of thing. So I wonder how that experience kind of maps onto this framework.
Yeah, there's like well, I don't know, or a romantic relationship with an AI chatbot or something, or
people are doing it apparently.
It's sad.
Yeah, I guess that's intertwined with just sort of being like our ever more individualistic, more lonely, right? Like it's more difficult than ever to unite with other people because you can just stay at home with your screen and have this sort of fake simulated version of socialization, of friendship, of romance, of maybe you sort of text one another or communicate online, and then with sex, like just I guess a lot of young guys just watch porn now, and we talked about this, like these the MGTOW guys of just sort of completely checking out of relationships. So it's the internet sort of I wonder what Bataille would make of the modern social media culture.
I have two riffs on it, just kind of like thinking about this on the cuff, but it's like one is maybe the releases in leaving reality. It's almost this psychotic thing where you break through the self through non-reality, through fantasy. It's kind of like and so that there may be more like breaks with reality related to gratification because it's in this fantasy realm. Another thought is there's no breakthrough. People are increasingly isolated. Sex stops functioning to give people that release. And I think if people don't have an active spirituality to give a breakthrough like that, they're not getting it through sex. The only thing left is violence. It's through fighting. And I think that does seem to be a way that people we fight a lot as a society, and I wonder if, and it could be that increases, that it's like violence become, or fighting and aggression becomes the outlet through breaking through, because it's not spirituality, and we're not really getting that through sex either. And it could get dark. It's already kind of dark.
Yeah, and it's interesting too. I mean, this is kind of literal, but I was thinking about what you were saying earlier, Andrew, about how couples who fight, the fighting becomes a substitute for sex. But I think it also becomes like a pretext for it, or like an add-on. Like the fighting is a form of foreplay, I think.
Oh,
for
yeah,
some
yeah.
couples, and so it becomes very hard to separate the violence from the intimacy.
Yeah, they fight and then they have sex. I mean, there's really great. I think Gilda. There's this great movie Gilda with what's the actress's name? But it's from the 40s or something. So it's all very like Hays Code presented, like very. It's clearly about this couple that has this dysfunctional relationship where they like fight and then have sex.
Yeah.
But it's I mean that's definitely, and people get addicted to it because it can be very gratifying, but there's this like rush, and then there's this kind of repair, but then it's like doesn't, I don't know, you can feel the ways that it's corrosive. But it's like they're connected, and there's like a lot of why is, I think dominant submissive dynamics, for example, are very normative, not necessarily like kink stuff, but just a dominant submissive dynamic is very common, and it's because you need that force and that but yeah, the fighting can serve a similar function, or
yeah. Well, this link between violence and sex, there's a quote here from page 20. The likelihood of suffering is all the greater since suffering alone reveals the total significance of the beloved object. So I think he's talking about specifically like a man who desires a woman, and his awareness that this desire is intertwined with possible suffering, because if he loses her, then he's going to suffer. Maybe that sort of heightens the possible pleasures. His possession of the beloved object does not imply death, but the idea of death is linked with the urge to possess. If the lover cannot possess the beloved, he will sometimes think of killing her. Often he would rather kill her than lose her, or else he may wish to die himself. So there's this, obviously, sort of this violent connotations here of he wants this person. If he can't have her, he would rather kill her, kill himself, commit some kind of violence. So yeah, this intertwining violence and sex, and yeah, this is I don't know if I fully buy this, that these things, violence, sex, religion, all these things have some sort of core source. I think Andrew used this phrase, sort of marbled together, but they are very primal. I mean, violence and sex, those are two things that it's something in our sort of animal nature of just they are attention grabbing, and they're things that we're kind of not supposed to talk about in polite society, but they're very tittillating and very, very interesting.
And,
but then
no, finish with it. You can.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna say something about this our now, because it's connected to something you said earlier, Andrew, about with sex, how now that we live in this culture of pleasure, it becomes harder to find these boundaries to, I guess, achieve satisfaction, because part of the pleasure is being a little bit transgressive, and now that you have to sort of what is transgressive now. But we treat sex, I mean, there's still this interesting contradiction around sex, where on the one hand we treat sex casually and non-judgmentally, and yet we still on some level believe it to be sacred, inviolable, where many people now say, you should be able to participate in sex work, and it shouldn't be stigmatized, it shouldn't be shamed, it should be work like anything else. But if you tell someone, so for example, if you say someone's smart or they have some kind of talent, you say, you'd be a great accountant, you'd be a great lawyer. If you say you'd be a great sex worker, that would be offensive.
I've heard.
Why?
Because I feel like when I was a kid, I remember somehow something came up where some hippie, somebody my parents knew, some hippie couple the husband had said something like, this is so gross. It said like, my wife, she'd be an amazing a sex surrogate. It wasn't a sex worker. So a sex surrogate is like a therapeutic, somebody who's like, it's more of it like in a therapeutic capacity. And it was just like such one of these like gross 1980s, like, with it couple things to say. And it was, I think all the other, like, I didn't even know how as a child this information came across my doorstep, but all the couples were like, oh my God, making fun of this couple for being so groovy that they would have. So, yeah.
Well,
yeah, but there's something interesting there, right? Where like, if you say that, it is weird. And, but the reason it feels weird is because on some level we all recognize sex as something sacred, as something that shouldn't be contaminated with I don't know, I guess our sort of more base or worldly interests or something of just sort of openly saying someone should be a sex surrogate, like you'd be a great sex worker. That I remember I read this article, I think it might have been in Eon or something, but the woman was a former prostitute, former sex worker, and she was against the legalization of sex work. And she talks about how, there was a book a few years ago written by this female Oxford philosopher basically defending sex work. And the woman writing this article was criticizing this Oxford professor, saying like, in this book, she says, oh, sex work is work like anything else, and in some cases it may even be better than the other alternative options for women who would be drawn to this kind of work. And so then she says, well, I recommend this Oxford professor to go up to the woman who mops the floors of her classrooms and say, hey, why are you mopping the floors? Why don't you go be a sex worker instead and see, like, would you be brave enough to do something like this? If mopping floors and having sex for money are equivalents, then we shouldn't be offended by that question.
Well, it does. I mean, I think I would just say it does indicate that there's a specialness around sexuality that does mean something to us. And I think if we ever lose that, which we might, it seems like we're kind of moving,
I think we're
moving that way
there.
culturally.
Yeah,
but if we really ever sincerely lose that, I think that's really scary, because I think that where those energies go after that could get dark fast, is my sense. But there is something worth, like, I think that the strongest critique of the Bataille is that his depiction of the erotic is very cold. There's not a lot of love or warmth or tenderness really in it. And there's not like attachment or intimacy or things like that are part of it. So there are a lot of missing pieces from his model. And I think it does have kind of like a dark, cold quality to it. I think one thing he doesn't quite reckon with either, and doesn't maybe go into as much as like shame. And I think shame around sex is actually also still very common, maybe universal. There's that people have some type of, they don't want to share necessarily everything that they like and are into. And I don't think that's a bad thing, but that's so common. And I remember there was like a bit that Louis C.K. did when he came back after his scandals. And he was like talking about, when he had this line about to the audience, you're all so lucky that nobody knows what your thing is. Yeah. And we want to keep it private. And I think that's it's probably a good impulse just from a psychological perspective of like, not going into like moral perspectives, which I think are legitimate too, but just in terms of like a psychologically functioning, like it's probably good to have some of that be kept private, just for like social functioning and our own psychological integration.
I would think so. I want to know how Bataille's wife left him for Lacan. That sounds like a great story for.
Well, she was an actress. I think she was like a very beautiful actress or model, and Lacan would introduce. I think her name was Sylvia Bataille, and Lacan would introduce her as like, "This is Sylvia Bataille. This is Bataille's wife, and I'm with her."
Okay.
And I think there was kind of, and I think Bataille died young. they were all very it was a really twisted scene, I think, in a lot of ways. But yeah,
Was Bataille okay with this? Like, was he like one of these super open-minded guys
I
who
think he
enjoyed
was
being
pretty.
cuckolded?
I think he wasn't. I think he gave her plenty of reason to leave him, and
Okay.
had
Yeah.
other lovers. One thing. Oh, one other thing I wanted to get to. There is a weird way that some of this stuff comes up in symptoms that aren't explicitly erotic necessarily. And one, I'm really curious in what each of you think about this, because, but like, there's a phenomenon, especially among adolescent girls, of cutting, and it's shockingly common that girls in this at a certain age cut, and I think it does kind of it has erotic overtones.
Oh yeah,
And
I'm sure,
and
because it's like a tension release thing.
it's a tension release thing that has these, and it might be partly a way that women of that age deal with sexual desires that they can't integrate.
But we should devote another conversation to this. But has cutting always been a thing, and then just people weren't really talking about it until recently? Because it wasn't a thing when I was a teenager. Like, anorexia was the thing, and I think there's this kind of conventional wisdom that cutting replaced anorexia, but that might be too reductive.
I think anorexia is still a thing, and there's still disordered
Yeah.
eating, but there is this kind of, I mean, they're kind of masochistic. It's like hurting yourself, and there's some type of release related
Right.
to it, that could have, I mean, a similar function. It's always been, I mean, I think it did get a resurgence on social media, and there was a real need to like keep that from becoming an epidemic.
Cutting.
Cutting.
Yeah.
That it was kind of spreading and being modeled in a way that was really appealing to a lot of people, and I think they have since worked to kind of make sure it doesn't proliferate on algorithms.
Yeah, I mean, it's a social contagion, and it's kind of competitive, and if you want to show, you're supposed to be hiding it, but then you kind of want people to see that you're doing it, and it's like a cry for help, and yeah, there's a lot going on there.
Yeah, you want to be seen, and and it's like a way of communicating frustrations and stuff, but
and a vulnerability that you're kind of a wounded bird.
yeah.
Yeah.
There's that classic observation that girls tend to internalize stress, whereas boys externalize. And so girls will cut or have eating disorders or kind of inflict harm on themselves when they're dealing with something stressful or traumatic, whereas boys will turn outward and fuck with other people instead, fighting and being disruptive in class, or just getting into these violent, aggressive altercations. But I'm wondering if, so you're suggesting if cutting for girls is some kind of like sublimated sexual impulse or something, I wonder if for boys fighting and being aggressive towards others is similar. And I'm thinking back to like even like when I was in high school, or if you the way that young boys are, a lot of their conflicts with one another, sometimes serious, sometimes playful, it does have like a weirdly homoerotic undertone.
Yeah.
Of like, like penis jokes and like ball tapping and just like weird, like sexually harassing each other. And a lot of it is kind of like you have this pent up hormones and desire for sex that you can't often get, especially as a teenage boy. And so it comes out in these weird ways with each other. So I feel like there may be something there.
I think despite the fact that we're doing a podcast on this, I kind of hope that Bataille doesn't become popular at a large scale. I think that would probably be a
we
bad
should make
thing.
it our mission to
because I think that
resurrect
there's
him.
something where it's really interesting. I think it's really helpful as a therapist when you're wondering, why is somebody doing this? And the more hypotheses you get about what might be happening, the more opportunities you have to potentially shift things. So it's so useful. But I kind of don't want people to start thinking this way on alongside. There's something that's kind of like very disturbing and horrifying about the whole thing. That people just being overly, thinking that about sex as violence, and thinking about, it's like it has this, to me it feels like the way like a serial killer would think. Like it has like this kind of serial killer energy to me.
Yeah, I remember. Did you guys watch the Dahmer Netflix show? It was a dramatization of Dahmer from maybe
No.
3-4 years ago. But
I might
there was
have.
a really disturbing
Yeah.
scene, which like actually did kind of help me to understand Dahmer more, where he's like him and his father. It's like a flashback scene where they like pick up some roadkill and he's like chopping it up and like doing some taxidermy or something. But then he gets aroused by it, by dealing with like the blood and the guts and the remains, and it aroused him sexually, and then he starts masturbating. And I thought like, oh, that's what he likes. This he likes, like there's something visceral, like biologically about this whole thing. So yeah, I guess there is, like, I see what you're saying, Andrew. There's like a weird thing with sex and violence, but then I also think, like, kind of the more, I guess, charitable interpretation is like he also seems to, in a way, like also be recommending boundaries, right? Like there is like you go too far in one direction of too far in the direction of Saddam, right? Like he using the quote from Dostoevsky that he opened this piece with, but then there's also sort of the Madonna, the pure sort of virginal aspect of sex too. That there's the kind of a push for balance here, maybe confinement, boundaries. That if you want to maximize pleasure, you need to have boundaries around it.
That they're kind of like baked in, that we do need these boundaries, because I think people are conflicted. I think people are confused. We don't have a sophisticated language to describe what we feel about eroticism, and I think people are very much confused about why it means things to us and why we need limits about it and why we feel about it the way we do and why we desire what we want. And I think that really does tie people in knots a lot, that they don't have a sense of framing like, okay, I do like, somebody can like a certain amount of forcefulness during sex, and it doesn't mean that they want that in another context, and there still needs to be some containment around it.
But isn't that part of like what the whole BDSM community is about? It's like we've got safe words and this is contained and there are very specific rules. I mean, if anything, aren't they sort of obsessed with rules? I don't know. They would. But then know. Is that kind of like an artificial construct in and of itself?
Well, there's something about the way like they have this like category in the DSM. I think it's still in there, of these paraphilias, and they're different types of just things that people get aroused by, like basically fetishes that become disorders if they're too much.
Yeah.
And they do have like a sadomasochistic categories in there, but they're defined in a way specifically to be extreme, because I think a lot of dominant submissive dynamics are just so common that if they let them just be like, if there's a dominant submissive, like I don't know the number of people that like, oh, like we like using a blindfold, or we've got pink handcuffs or something. It's kind of like, that's not what it is in the DSM in terms of like, there's a whole spectrum of like really intense stuff with blood, and it's like dark and weird, and then there's like I think there's a normative, there's the pink handcuffs.
Isn't it funny how there's only one letter that separates the DSM from BDSM? Just think about that.
That's full of meaning.
All right, we should wrap up. Any final thoughts here? Anything you want to leave our audience with, other than we're not going to tell them to go out and read Bataille, Story of the Eye?
Well, that's a really twisted one. I haven't read it. I have such mixed feelings about a lot of this stuff. I mean, we had a number of people early on in OTI who I think might have left. We get such a range of people that are interested in the project, and I want to keep that so bad. And we get a lot of religious people and people who are thinking about porn, often in a very critical but thoughtful way. I really am interested in those perspectives and want those here. We also had one of our early members was a woman who directed porn.
Oh,
and I thought she was really fascinating. I really wanted to hear her thoughts about things. I think she might have left or something, but or maybe she was alienated by something that we published or something. But I just want to. I love getting perspectives on this stuff that's thoughtful. I think so much of it is just like, so much of the discourse is so limited and not thoughtful, and I think it's because we get dysregulated by it. And we
Yeah.
get overly moralistic because we get dysregulated by it, as opposed to really thinking about what's happening and why. And I hope OTI is able to keep these perspectives in dialogue, and because I think society needs it. But,
Yeah. When I was doing the podcast with Sarah Hayter, we had Jackie St. James, who's a female porn director, on as a guest, and she would classify her genre as feminist porn, mostly because you can see the man's face. That's the big difference. Because I didn't. This was news to me. I guess men they want to project themselves onto the man in porn, so you wouldn't want to see the guy's face.
Interesting.
So yeah. Anyway.
Right.
All right. Well.
Nice to hear that women like men's faces.
Oh, of course. Face.
Yeah.
Face can out us more important than other things often. All right. Anyway, on that note, thank you both. It's been another great conversation, and we'll see everyone next time.
Okay.
Thanks, Megan.